wonderful weirdos. Welcome back to another episode of Weird Wonderverse. Before we get into talking about some weird shit, I just want to say real quick that you're safe here to wonder and you're safe here to be. No fear, no shame, just curiosity. You don't have to believe anything that I say. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to be spiritual, religious, or put yourself in any kind of box. This is for entertainment, exploration, and curiosity purposes. So no fear mongering, no superiority complexes, and definitely no trust me bro energy. Okay, so today we're talking about something you've probably heard people reference, especially when we're talking about awakening or collective change, but most of us were never actually told where it came from. The 100th monkey theory. So the idea of this, the basic storyline goes, back in the 1950s, researchers were observing monkeys on a group of islands in Japan, and they noticed that one monkey learned a new behavior. He started washing his sweet potatoes before eating them. But the cool thing is at first, it was just like another monkey witnessing it, like, hey, that looks like a clean sweet potato. I don't want a dirty sweet potato. And then he started washing his sweet potato. And then it slowly, gradually, everyone started washing their sweet potatoes because who wants a dirty sweet potato? And even the mama monkeys were like, my babies aren't getting dirty sweet potatoes. The whole long of the short of it is the story claims that once a certain number of monkeys learned the behavior, the so-called 100th monkey, the behavior suddenly appeared in monkeys in other islands. No direct contact, no visible explanation. And that's the part that caught people's attention. Because if that were true, it would suggest something bigger than simple learning. It would suggest that once a threshold is reached, knowledge itself becomes, well, shared. Now, before we go any further, I want to be very clear about something. This theory is very controversial. Some parts were exaggerated, some parts were misunderstood, and science absolutely has an opinion on it. So today is not about proving the story is literally true, but what we're actually exploring is the question underneath it. Why do ideas sometimes spread slowly and then all of a sudden, boom? Why do cultural shifts feel invisible until suddenly they're everywhere? Why does it sometimes feel like you're thinking something and then the rest of the world catches up? That's what this episode's about. We're going to look at what science says about how ideas spread, how spirituality and consciousness interprets this idea, and finally, where I personally land holding both without losing my mind. And not to convince you of anything, not to tell you what to believe, just to explore why this idea refuses to disappear and why humans keep coming back to it whenever we talk about the collective change, shared awareness, or collective consciousness. What science actually says. Okay, so let's talk about what science actually says about the 100th monkey idea, because this is usually where people either roll their eyes or dig their heels in. First, the honest part. There is no solid scientific evidence that the information magically jumped between monkey to monkey population the moment a certain amount of monkeys learned a behavior. The original monkey observation did happen. They did study that. Scientists did watch monkeys learn to wash sweet potatoes. But later, reviews showed the behavior most likely spread through normal means. Watching each other, copying behavior, the occasional movement between groups. So no, science does not support the idea that knowledge suddenly teleported across space. That's important to say, so we're not mixing stories and studies. But, and this is the important part, science does support the idea that group behavior changes in ways that can feel sudden, dramatic, and almost invisible until they're not. One of the biggest explanations for this is something called social proof. Social proof is basically the human tendency to look to others to decide what's normal, acceptable, or correct, especially when we're unsure. There have been classic psychology experiments where people were placed in a room and told to perform a simple task, like standing up or responding to a bell. Unbeknownst to them, everyone else in the room was in on the experiment. So when the bell rang, everyone else stood up. So the new person stood up too, not because it made sense, not because they were told to, but because everyone else did. I'm sure you guys saw the reel or the TikTok. Eventually, even when the original participant were replaced with new people, the behavior continued. No one knew why they were doing it anymore. They just knew this is what people do when the bell rings. That's how powerful social learning is. Science also talks about critical mass, the point where a behavior or idea reaches enough people that it suddenly spreads much faster. And this is where the modern world changes everything, because we're not watching ideas move slowly anymore. We're watching them move at internet speed. The 100th monkey walked, so your For You page could run. Algorithms didn't invent this, they just sped it up. So we see this all the time in language and slang, 6'7", fashion trends, technology, social norms, cultural shifts. For a long time, nothing seems to happen, and then boom, one day it feels like it's everywhere. Like, how have I never known about the Dubai chocolate, guys? Come on, pistachio butter, though? Not because something mystical occurred, but because enough small individual connections stacked up quietly until the system tipped. There's also research on social contagion, the idea that emotions, behaviors, and beliefs spread through groups. Studies show that mood spread, anxiety spreads, confidence spreads, beliefs spread, even without direct instruction. And then there's the network theory, which explains how once enough points of the system are activated, the entire system behaves differently. At a certain threshold, the structure itself changes. So while science doesn't support the literal version of the 100th monkey theory, it absolutely supports the feeling people associate with the sense of it, that nothing is happening, and then boom, suddenly everything changes. So no, this isn't magically, in the Harry Potter sense, but stay with me. This is Weird Wonderverse. There's a very real, very documented pattern that I always come back to when I think about this. The moment when something was considered impossible until it wasn't. For decades, experts believed that human body couldn't run a mile in under 4 minutes. Doctors said it would be dangerous, that the heart couldn't even handle it. Then in 1954, a runner named Roger Bannister did it. And what happened next is the big part, the part that people don't forget. Other runners started breaking the 4-minute mile almost immediately, not generations later, not after human biology changed, within weeks, within months. The same things happen again and again in mountaineering and endurance sports. Certain climbs that are labeled impossible, certain limits declared final, until one person does it, and suddenly others can too. Muscles didn't change, physics didn't change. What changed was the human mind accepted it as possible. Once something entered collective awareness as achievable, once it was seen, embodied, and proven, it stopped being unreachable. And that's the pattern that I just can't ignore, because it suggests that the belief isn't just motivational, it might be structural, something that actually shapes what becomes available in reality. Consciousness, intention, and why this still matters. Okay, so this is part where I really slow down a little bit, because when we start talking about things like collective consciousness, intention, frequency, these aren't just ideas to me. They're not trends, they're not concepts I'm just throwing around casually. This is the foundation of how I've lived my life for a very long time. When people start to talk about law of attraction or intention setting or frequency, what they're talking about is the idea that consciousness isn't passive, that our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and internal state actually interact with reality, not in the cartoonish wish it here and it appears kind of way, but in the subtle, cumulative, directional way. The idea of collective consciousness says that we're not operating as an isolated unit. We're individuals, yes, but we're also part of a shared field of awareness. And when enough people shift how they think, what they tolerate, what they believe is possible, the field itself changes. That doesn't cancel science. It doesn't contradict psychology or neuroscience. It just suggests that consciousness might be more foundational than we currently understand. Science is very good at explaining how things move once they're in motion. It's still catching up to explaining why certain shifts happen when they do. From this perspective, the 100th monkey theory isn't about monkeys at all. It's about the threshold of awareness. It's about the moment when an idea, a belief, or a way of being becomes accessible, not because everyone was told, but because enough people embodied it. That's how I understand intention. Not forcing outcomes, not controlling reality, but aligning internally in a way that makes certain paths more likely to open up for you. And when large groups of people do that together through prayer, meditation, shared focus, or shared values, the effects don't always look miraculous. They look directional. Trends shift, norms shift. What was unthinkable becomes discussable. What was discussable becomes acceptable. And what was acceptable becomes normal. From where I stand, science and spirituality aren't in competition here. They're describing the same phenomenon from different perspectives and distances. Science is mapping the circuitry, and spirituality is describing the current running through it. And just because we don't have instruments that can truly measure consciousness doesn't mean that it isn't real. It just means we're a little bit early. Where I land? So, after all that, the science, the psychology, the history, the patterns, here's where I land. I don't think the 100th monkey story is meant to be taken literally, and I also don't think it's meaningless. I think it's pointing at something real, just in story form. Science helps explain how ideas spread, social proof, critical mass, networks. That all matters, but I also believe consciousness plays a role in when something becomes possible. I don't think belief is just motivational. I think it's directional. I think when enough people stop accepting the same limits, whether those limits are physical, cultural, emotional, or moral, reality reorganizes around that shift. Not because the universe is obeying us, not because we're controlling anything, but because we're participating in it. I don't see science and spirituality as opposites. I see them as working on different timelines. Science measures what has stabilized, and spirituality explores what's emerging. And history shows us this over and over again. Things are impossible, well, until suddenly they aren't. Not because humans changed overnight, but because awareness did. So when people talk about awakening or tipping points or critical mass, I don't hear hype. I hear humans trying to describe that moment when something shifts internally first and then externally. That's what the 100th monkey represents to me. Not a magic number, not a mystical shortcut, but a reminder that individual shifts matter, that collective change isn't loud at first, but what feels invisible right now might be laying the groundwork for something that hasn't even arrived yet. And whether you frame that through science, spirit, God, consciousness, or just human behavior, the invitation is the same. Pay attention to what you're embodying, because change doesn't start when everyone agrees. It starts when enough people do. And sometimes that's all it takes. Thanks for wandering through the Weird Wonderverse with me today. If this sparked any curiosity, sit with it. You don't have to decide what you believe. You don't have to agree with me. And if it doesn't resonate, that's totally cool too. The space isn't about answers. It's about noticing the questions. And also, if you would like me to read one of your stories on Weird Wonderverse, please send me any kind of spooky, weird, abnormal stories to weirdwonderverse@gmail.com. I look forward to reading some of your stories and connecting with some of you in the near future. Stay curious, stay grounded, and stay wonderfully weird.